Well, Jim, in the 90s, I don't know if Helix Sleep was around back then. I don't think it was, but a lot of people, if you didn't have a good night's sleep and you woke up in the middle of the night, Nitro was on again. Something a lot of people don't talk about. WCW Nitro aired again the same night right after it aired.
That's right. And that's unwieldy grammar, but now you have reminded me of that. They just started over and repeated the whole goddamn thing again. They had like 4 hours.
But it was a big advantage because it just reiterated everything from before. It wasn't like 4 fresh hours. It was 2 hours and 2-hour replay. And that was probably a big benefit to them, but
you could watch both.
That's right. You can watch both. A lot of us did that. A lot of us who were taping both used that as a nice tool, but we're talking about the death of WCW or who killed WCW.
Which is, and there's a lot of tools involved in that.
And of course, episode 2 this past week on Vice. This is your show, but I'm just taking over here. Who killed WCW episode 2?
Well, that's the daggum question we've been asking. And I'll tell you one thing that we haven't got to the aha moment yet. It's only second episode down, third one coming up, fourth one is the finale. So we hadn't got to the aha moment, but we have settled one debate. We know who has the best agent or PR guy that set up their deal. This is the Eric Bischoff show. Now, I know he's the best storyteller. He's the most charismatic guy of all of the people involved in the talking heads. And he also helped recruit many of the talking heads who might be somewhat like-minded. And the narrative seems to be letting Eric plead his case most sympathetically. There are counterpoints to be had, but
Bret Hart.
Well, you got to have the counterpoints. It's hard not to have the counterpoints, but they're kind of glossing over and letting him get away because he's so smooth with it. A lot of shit that Eric says, he just blurts, it's not the case. It's not true, Poop Deck Pappy. And maybe it's misremembering. I don't know. Was he on any type of chemical enhancements back in those days? It was a wild, crazy time. Maybe he doesn't remember everything, but it's always standards and practices fault and this and that. And we'll hear more on that, I'm sure, next week. But also he's Bret Hart. Well, he needed a new star for Thunder. He'd been talking to Bret for 2 years. It started in 96. Then Vince let him in 97 before they pitched Thunder. But anyway, there is some finger pointing starting to be done here. And the title of the episode was The Streak is Over, because, of course, 83 weeks was the magic number. And from living through it and being up there on the other side, there was definitely consternation in Stamford about the continual ratings losses, even though, Brian, when you look back, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we know that it was multiple times what they are now. Vince was yelling at everybody and mad, we got to do something and let's hotshot this thing and get the Zamboni and whatever the fuck, with an audience of probably, 3 times, 4 times what they have right now?
I don't know the numbers, but significantly larger, yeah.
Probably be 3. So...
Hey, were you working there? You know what I hadn't even thought about until you just started saying all this? Didn't Bischoff take out a billboard right opposite Titan Tower?
Oh, God, I think, well, not like with his picture on it like a real estate
for
guy, but a WCW. Well, yeah.
Like a real estate guy. That would have been a hell of a move. Looking for real estate in Stamford? Oh, what a move that would have been.
Either that or any Connecticut employees thinking of moving to Georgia, call ETE at 1-800.
Oh, man.
Oh, God. But so it starts out that Bischoff says that, Schiller calls him, they want 2 more hours because Nitro's so good. And the question is, will it weaken Monday? But Bischoff didn't want to tell Ted no. And then that's what he said he needed a star. He brought Bret in for Thunder, which everybody knows that's obviously not the case. Go ahead.
That's obviously not the case. However, that may not necessarily be not the case, in awful English right there, But we don't know how he sold it to the Turner executives, is the point.
Well, true. So maybe he doesn't want to fucking expose himself after all this time.
Because again, you had to justify a giant contract, the biggest in the company. You also had to deal with, at that time, guys who had most favored nations contracts. I think Kevin Nash and Scott Hall had to waive it for Bret.
Yeah, they did.
So there were a lot of things with money moving around. How are you going to justify that? Hey, you're making us take on another 2 hours.
But that's when they have all the talking heads who, about the only thing they universally agreed on was they put Bret over. Everybody that had a comment, oh yeah, Bret, they put him over big. And he came in, as we've talked about so many times, after the Montreal screw job for $2.8 million a year. And I think it was going to be 3 years. It was going to be. And Bret says, I had a great first night in and everything, quote, went downhill from there. And the quote was, everything Eric Bischoff ever said was a lie. So that's where we start there. And then they start telling the story that everybody said, well, they can't book 10 hours a week. And they expand the NWO to, have 30 people in multiple groups and whatever, all the things that they did. Yeah, well, both of these things can be true. Maybe it might be difficult to book 10 hours a week with the pay-per-view or whatever, but at the same time, you don't have to just do ridiculous, stupid shit at the last minute for almost no reason, which is what they were doing weekly, depending on who he was listening to and how much sleep everybody'd had. And so that the problem with booking too much television is that you dilute. There's not as much happening. You're booking more television, so you got to make more shit happen. You make more shit happen, and people can't keep track of the goddamn shit that was happening. Are you keeping track of this?
I'm keeping track of this shit that's happening, yes.
All right. Well, anyway, that's what they're very sympathetic to themselves, but no, it was a rotten television program with little pre-planning. And this is going to be an issue. It wasn't at that point, but it will be later on in this program, the money they were spending on talent. But anyway, Goldberg, they create a star. Really by accident, they just let him go out there with minimal training in the early days, remember, and had no thought of a win streak. They just knew, well, we don't want to beat this fucking guy.
I think Mike Tenay came up with the winning streak.
Mike Tenay came up with the winning streak after there technically was one, because they had a green football player that they thought they could do something with, but he wasn't very good, so they didn't want to let him go very long, so they just had him beat people. This is not rocket surgery or brain science. It's as old as wrestling. It is the old-fashioned, monster push for a big green guy, a Leviathan in Ohio Valley Wrestling. But that's the thing, is that then when the fans started liking it, because a great-looking guy like that, a huge monster winning in dominant fashion, explosively and looking like it hurts, which it did, that gets over with people. So they start chanting for him, or they start cheering. And that's when Mike Tenay said, hey, he's undefeated. Let's go with this. And that became a thing. But they backed into it. And then they fucked it up. They didn't even mention in the show where they started manufacturing the streak that people were keeping track of on television week to week. But
yeah,
the next week on TV, he'd have multiple more wins than it was possible for him to have had matches. And it just all was bullshit, right? Because the fans were keeping better track than the company was. But that's a thing. They got him over as an attraction. But he was still green, and as you hear from his own lips and from listening to him talk, he kind of is a mark, and he was never taught, and he didn't know what the fuck he was doing. And you can't blame him when he becomes one of the biggest wrestling stars of all time in fucking 6 months, knowing dick all about what he's doing.
Going through the power plant.
Yes, I mean, and having those matches. So that's the thing is, again, you're dealing with polar opposites is a theme today on the program. Now you're going to have Goldberg and Bret Hart. Bret Hart, who is almost like a goddamn Picasso of wrestling, who prides himself in his art and his craft and his business and is serious as a heart attack. And the one thing that he's proudest of is never hurting anybody. And then you have Goldberg, who's like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. They just told me to do this thing. God, it's great when the fans cheer for me. And hey, I told him the kick was coming. What kind of kick? From fucking where? More on that later. Anyway, they create the star, and even Nash is talking about how stiff he was. Like, dude, brother, and nobody wanted to stand in front of that. And then they told the story about when Goldberg got over, that Bischoff says, Hulk called me and said, it's time. I want to put Goldberg over in the Georgia Dome. This was the best one of the fucking...
You know what? At least they had one person from the corporate side there to say the obvious. Why isn't this on pay-per-view?
Yes.
It's not just like the wrestling people that really knew. That guy was on the business side. He's like, what the fuck? Why are we giving this away for free?
Well, Brian, stop me if I leave anything out. But what it was they were so hot, and especially in Atlanta, they had booked the Georgia Dome for a Nitro with nothing advertised. And they sold like 25,000 tickets. And then they kept selling, and they were going to do close to 40,000 people. And also, all the Turner executives were going to be there because it's in Atlanta and it's such a big deal. It's going to be on national television. And less than a week before, that's when Hulk tells Bischoff, yeah, I want to wrestle fucking Goldberg. And then did he tell him he wanted to wrestle him first? And then he said he'd put him over.
I think that may have been when he said he would drop it to him, because I think they advertised the match first locally as a non-title match.
Yes, but that was only a week or two out.
Right, and then...
there was no promotion.
Like, between the Nitro before and the Nitro it aired, there was there was nothing on the Nitro before saying that. I don't think. Again, I'm trying to remember in real time. But there was no promotion for it, and there should have been. It would have been the biggest pay-per-view in company history.
Well, yeah, it might have been the biggest pay-per-view in pay-per-view history at that point. But the thing is, Hogan knew he would look good if he was in the main event of the biggest house they ever drew in front of all the TBS executives, and he put himself in that match in the main event that hadn't been advertised in less than 2 weeks with no promotion, no angles, no nothing, just we're going to have it. And they gave it away on free television.
And he gets to say he drew the house.
He gets to say he drew the house, or doesn't even have to say that. It's in the people, it's in the executives' minds. Well, Hogan's the main event guy, and look, here's Goldberg. And then they nullified it and fucking switched it around. What, weeks later, right? So they blew the match on free TV and with a week's promotion for Hulk's ego. And then they took it off of him with the goofy thing with Nash, which we'll discuss in a second. But first, this fiasco.
Yeah, and again, it was a big moment in terms of, as a fan, it was one of the great moments in WCW, maybe the last really great one. Goldberg winning the title from Hogan, like you said. They didn't address them botching it up already with the fake numbers that were clearly fake to the viewers.
And also, Goldberg remarked on how thrilling it was, the crowd popping for him when he won the title. You could tell he's like the Road Warriors the first year or two. When they got fucking excited, Jesus Christ, it's like getting hit with a Volkswagen.
He's a less offensive Ultimate Warrior in a lot of ways.
Yes. And I'm not saying he's not wrong. No, the Warrior had multiple chances to get it right and was a prick. This guy was just thrown into shit and was a phenomenon. A stiff phenomenon made out of potatoes.
And that match would have made more money for WCW than any other match ever. It would have broken the pay-per-view record for that company, and instead it was just on this. It was still a successful night, but it's kind of the beginning of the end. This is right around the time that Tyson comes into WWF. This is right around the time that, obviously, according to what they're saying here publicly, Bischoff had burned out and made Kevin Nash the booker. So
Well, no, he wasn't a booker yet.
that was about to happen. That's my point. It's all around this period of time where the problems that WCW are going to have start becoming more apparent.
I wonder if Vince McMahon had ever dreamed if Nash goes down there and works for them, they'll make him the booker. He would have done like the Bill Watts Grizzly Smith deal. Grizzly Smith was booking for the opposition in Mississippi, the Culkins, and he called Watts. He said, "Can I come back?" And Watts said, "No, I'll pay you $250 a week. Just stay there and keep booking for them. You're going to put them out of business."
Well, this was interesting, and let's talk about it since you brought it up. Eric Bischoff and Kevin Nash. Kevin Nash just volunteers to be the booker, and Eric Bischoff says, "Okay."
Okay.
But Kevin Nash kind of goes into some of his philosophy on booking. Absolutes in his eyes, or at least the way he put it here, of his booking. What did you think? Him talking about that it should always be the babyface chasing a heel champion. I mean, he seemed pretty absolute about that. What did you think of that?
We'll go through a few of these things this is at the same point where Bischoff started doing the standards and practices thing. Well, TBS wants a more family show, and old Truman Capote there, Brad Siegel, says, can they do it without being as lewd as WWE? They took it into the gutter.
Well, he ain't wrong.
Well, no, he's not wrong. But the thing is, again, at least some of the WWF lewdness made half-ass sense. They were just all over the place. But nevertheless, so Bischoff is blaming standards and practices. Nash wants to be the booker. He says, "Okay, go ahead." Again, sometimes the greatest player is not the guy you want to be the coach or the manager of the team, right? We've talked about this sports analogy. You know more sports than I do. And sometimes the best worker is not the best teacher, and these other similes that you can draw. But because Kevin Nash, who had been in the business at that point 8 years and had never booked or been a member of a creative team, suddenly, he's got, whether you like his ideas or not, he's got good ideas. So I'm making the booker of this company is grossing fucking $100 million a year or whatever the fuck it was. It just, and Nash, the most disinterested talking head ever. I've seen people were more excited to be put in a medically induced coma. And that's the thing. What Medusa said. Here's a quote: "Once you have the monkeys running the zoo, you're in trouble." And so Bischoff just takes off. Nash is the booker. We know that, God bless Kevin, but he's always been out for either himself or his close circle of clique friends, and he doesn't care about the company, which his statements, bore out. So the first thing he does, they've got Goldberg, who's massively over. He's one of the two biggest stars in the company. Did Hogan have that much heat or that much interest or that much? No, Goldberg is pretty much the guy, right? And he can't work a fucking lick. So instead of working around it, instead of doing what Dusty did with Nikita Koloff in 1985, 4, whatever it was, instead of having the best in-ring heels bump off of him, and have the best talent in the business in the locker room in his ear trying to smart him up and tell him how to work. As Goldberg said, I don't know, there's a bunch of backstabbing cutthroats. Nobody's telling him any goddamn thing. And Nash wants to beat him because you can't have the top guy if he can't carry it. He's whatever. If he's selling that many tickets, one tackle pancake with everybody. That's all you fucking needed. If you're trying to get this fucking guy over, and he's a menace to society in the ring, and he's stiff and he doesn't know what he's doing, he's a mark for himself, then fuck it, find somebody else. If he's already that fucking over, as we've applied to another situation, fire the fucking writers.
Are you banging stuff?
Yes, I'm getting vehement here on the goddamn desk. So that's the point is they beat him. They hit him with a fucking taser. I remember seeing this. They hit him with a taser and they beat him. And it buried him because he didn't know. Goldberg did not know how to take care of himself. I'm not talking about physically. That's a saying. The pros, experienced veterans, they can lose in such a way, or they can show weakness in such a way that they can get the guy over, get the opponent over, get the issue over, but they can take care of themselves. They don't come out looking bad or stupid or with their dick in the fucking mud. But a guy that green, he don't know how to take care of himself, and it just bleh. And he couldn't argue his points in the goddamn finish meetings, if they did have them, eloquently, because he didn't know the terminology and he didn't understand the psychology. He was being told things to do by people who may or may not have had his best interest at heart, such as when Nash becomes the booker and then they tase him and Nash beats him. And that's where, yes, the babyface making the chase is a classic rule of thumb in wrestling. There's more money in the chase than there is in the capture for Dusty Rhodes or Jack Briscoe or Cody Rhodes, not for Andre the Giant or Haystacks Calhoun or no.
Not for Bruno Sammartino.
And not for Bruno. It depends not only on the individual that's chasing, but the people that are being chased. That has to fit. And Goldberg and Dusty Rhodes or Jack Briscoe and Cody Rhodes are as far apart, or Bruno. They're as far apart as night and day, but the point is, when you have a guy that's working with the people, you figure out a way to work around him rather than to try to make him conform. This was not damaging to the industry. No, the shit they were doing in other matches was a lot more damaging than Goldberg having putrid, basic fucking matches and being over like God. So anyway, you know, that nobody wanted to see Andre the Giant chase anything. Nobody wants to see the goddamn Hulk chase anything or whatever. So, and then Nash said they showed the pin where he wins, and he says, when I won, I was over as fuck. I don't care what anybody said. Yeah, he was over as fuck, and so was WCW's business. Over.
But that was part of the problem, too. The cool heel got himself over more than the biggest babyface in the company.
And that goes to where they fuck themselves in the proverbial keister. In the next time they do the Georgia Dome, the Hulk and Nash with the finger poke, and Hulk winning 1, 2, 3, and Bischoff. Folks, if you don't know, we can't go into so many details on all this stupidity. If you don't know that at one time they actually built up a deal on Nitro from the Georgia Dome where the Hulk Hogan had challenged Nash for the title. It's going to be the big fucking battle of the Titans, and then boom, Hulk pokes him with a finger. He takes a big bump, and Hulk covers him 1, 2, 3. And Bischoff tried to explain this like it somehow could have been good if it had come off right. Was that the description you were getting?
I was under the impression he now accepts that it was not well thought out or it wasn't the right idea, but
he was trying to explain it somehow like it made some kind of sense, though.
Well, this was the problem then as it is now. A lot of people try to justify a lot of the things that were wrong at the time.
Well, and Nash was, it sounded like he was, it was good. Kevin Nash is a smart guy. He's had to have learned something in 25 years. It wasn't good. And then that was the night that they spoiled Raw, and I remember this because I was at the other fucking location. And the people tuned into Raw to see Mick beat Rock for the title when Shivani had spoiled the result and knocked it. And that led to the flipping of the war. This bullshit that WCW put on their television that pissed off so many of their fans again. While on the other channel, they got to see exactly what they wanted to see, which was Mick Foley win the big one. And they gave us advertising for it. And Nash, the booker's comments was, a lot of mistakes were made, but my check didn't change. There's the problem with why you don't let some of your stars get creative control or be bookers. Because they don't give a shit about you or the company or the business in general. And Conan was trying to be honest. Infighting, jealousy.
No, Conan was has been really good in the series so far.
Yeah. And he came out and said, we did ourselves no favors. Who would Bischoff listen to? And anyway, I loved hearing Bischoff talk about how they moved expenses around in the various departments at TBS to how, yes, WCW did get shorted on not being paid for television for a long time and not being paid what they would have been had there not been the relationship and all that stuff. But it was all bullshit. They benefited as much as because they were, at one point, Turner Home Entertainment was paying some of the stars at least part of their salaries. And the big money, the talent being paid ridiculous money, was being paid by Turner Broadcasting itself, not WCW. That's why nobody could afford to quit and go to the WWF when WCW was sold, because they still got paid for a year and a half. More money than Vince would pay them to work. So it was the bookkeeping in that company, along with everything else, was suspicious from the start. But anyway, here's the problem. They were drawing ridiculous money until they fucked it up because they self-destructed, and all of them couldn't handle it, couldn't keep up with it. But Bischoff was spending so much money. The talent card, there were hundreds of talents under contract being paid every week. Many of them never worked. You never saw them. God, that sounds familiar with modern day, doesn't it? And they even investigated him because the story went around, probably from somebody that he was pissed off at and didn't get one of the contracts, that he would get kickbacks, Bischoff, on the contracts he gave out because they were so ridiculous. But when he was cleared, they told him when he was cleared, he said, well, this made me quit being loyal to the company. What?
But not quit his job.
Well, and that's the thing. Maybe he just can't handle money, either his own or the company's. Maybe he just does spend like that. Vince McMahon was not going to pay anywhere near this amount of money for anywhere near this amount of fucking guys. It's not like he was engaging in a nip and tuck bidding war. You know, the thing with Bret, okay, that's an individual thing, and a couple of other individuals, but as a by and large, I think Scott Norton, somebody said he was making like $750,000 a year there at one point.
Yeah.
I don't know if Vince would have fucking known him if he'd have tripped over him on the sidewalk. It's just insane. So the drunken sailor spending rule was in effect. Maybe that's Eric's issue. He keeps bouncing back and forth from the brink because he just can't hang on to the cash. But back to Bret Hart. Here's a quote. They're killing me off on purpose. And so finally, he says he pulled Goldberg aside and said, I want to teach you not to hurt guys. Please don't hurt me. And I will teach you. And I can see him doing this. I can, honest to God, see him and hear him. It's telling the guy, look, I'll teach you not to. But at that time, maybe Goldberg was like, because you can tell even now, he's like, well, hey, I told him watch the kick. What the fuck? What kind of kick from where? And watch the kick is be ready to take a bump when I working kick you, not watch as I kick you in the head as hard as I possibly can. Yeah, watch this, motherfucker. Boom, there you see that? If you missed it, I'll do it again. So and that's Bret's, when they showed the tape, Bret, he's starting to turn to take like a drop kick, and he's got his left hand going up, and this foot just comes in like a goddamn telephone pole on top of an 18 fucking wheeler, and bam, it blows past his hand and fucking kicks him right in the side of the head. And that's when Bret said, watch the kick. They never explained to me. I do this move where I kick guys in the head as hard as I can. And then he said, this is a quote. I wrote this down. Good fuck. I somehow will myself to stand up where I'm run over by this imbecile. And he speared him and his head hits the fucking mat again. And he said it was a lousy ending for a great career. Fucking hell.
No, Bret steals the show in every one of these things. He's so good and so honest.
Yes, and you can't dispute anything. And you can tell Goldberg's fed up with it, right? Like, I've been hearing this for 25 years. But, brother, again, polar opposites. The one person, me and Russo, Bret and Goldberg, Flair and Dusty in a working way, whatever the case, you almost can't find people that would be any farther apart in viewpoint or whatever.
That is my favorite thing about it. I love Bret. Bret's one of my all-time favorites, and he's like the Canadian Cornette now, the way he talks about these things. But with Goldberg, it's got to the point where he's so tired of hearing about it that whenever they show him, he's like, oh, like his body's moving. You can tell he's so fed up with Bret Hart telling everyone that he's an imbecile that killed his career. Because now he's asked about it like nonstop, and Bret doesn't stop talking about it. So very, very funny.
Bill Goldberg. And in the summer '99, as they're ending this episode, Bischoff said he's frustrated, he's burned out. That was a good description of WCW's fans and viewers also. And he called it one of the worst periods of his life, and it was September 10, 1999. Schiller calls, that's what he said. Schiller calls Bischoff in and sends him home, which kind of sounds redundant. You got to come in immediately. As soon as you get in, go the fuck home. What the fuck? But Bischoff said he was confused and relieved. I can understand in some ways how he feels about that, if nothing else. And he went to Wyoming to fish. And if that's what relaxes you, go ahead. But next week, shit stain arrives. And the shit, as Gary Hart used to say, will be on, brother.
This will be the most enjoyable the Russo era of WCW has ever been, because it'll be in clip form with just people mocking it and talking about how bad it is. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, now here's another bonus to this. I've never seen most of this. Because think about this. He left in September, October, whatever it was. I had moved to Louisville in July of '99, started in OVW. And the last thing I gave a shit about once I got out of Stamford was watching WCW. It was hard enough for me to keep up with WWF at that point. I quit that, 3 or 4 years later, and started just watching our programs and OVW and WWF. So I have not seen, I've heard about most of the stupid shit that he did, but on a week-to-week basis, I've never seen this stuff.
They had a quote from him in the trailer for next week, and it was something like, I was better on camera than 80% of the roster.
I saw that in the commercial, yes. And that ranks up there with another one of his quotes when he said, well, if I can learn to work in the ring, anyone can.
He's right.
So
if he could ever learn how to work in a ring, anyone could.
Yeah, so let me just say this. It may have taken 25 years, but finally, through the miracle of wrestling documentary television, I have finally started to be vindicated as how could anybody possibly hate being in a goddamn room with another human being as much as I did with Russo? It must have been my fault, but now people can see. Now, almost overwhelmingly, the response is, no wonder. What the fuck? How could you sit and listen to this fucking moron and his drivel without wanting to grab him around the fucking throat? So I have a feeling next week we'll set some records for people putting their foot through the TV screen.
It's going to be interesting. There's 4 episodes, right? So I guess there's going to be 2 episodes.
We've done 2. There's 2 more to go. 2 and 2 is 4. Are you hanging with me on this complicated new math?
Well, I guess there's going to be a lot. There's going to be just a smaller period of time to cover in the next 2 episodes, so there may be a lot of clips and stuff. We'll be interesting. We'll see.
There's a lot more blame to go around from the end than there is from the start of the beginning. We're really going to get into the finger pointing next week, especially when Shitstain gets involved. Because he can fucking deflect and genuflect and send criticism other people's way in a fucking heartbeat.
If they want to if they really want to get some numbers, release a supercut online of just Bret and Goldberg back and forth.
Well, the one on Twitter, did you see the one that I retweeted? Somebody did it where they just clipped. It was like a minute of Bret Hart's greatest WCW experiences. It was him saying, idiots, stupid idiots, these idiots. He was an idiot. What a failure.
I didn't see it.
It's over and over. Oh, my God.